1 week season.
Welcome to Solo Ship Week 15. I'm Squirrel Patrol. I'm joined by JM DeWin from 1 week season. JM, I made a tweet last X. I don't know what we call it now. Last Sunday. About the DraftKings Millie Maker. Ended up being my most viewed tweet that I've ever made, even more than when my dog pooped in the house and the Roomba went over it and and put it all over the house. And even more than when I won the Millie Maker. But I posted about how last week I had 95% Zach Charbonnet. I was my next most owned running back was Garendo. My two highest owned quarterbacks were Josh Allen and Sam Darnold. I was double the field on Justin Jefferson with 2 touchdowns. And I lost more than half my money in the DraftKings Millie Maker, the 555. I put in 60 entries. And so I just wanted to talk about that tweet just, briefly, because I think there's a couple of lessons about it and about, last week in general. One thing I realized is I did not lose more than half my money. Actually lost just under half my money. And then the second thing I realized, if people were looking back at my lineups, wondering how that happened, I actually did not have Josh Allen as my second highest owned quarterback. Those were my FanDuel exposures. And so that made me think that if I was better at math and had more attention to detail, maybe I wouldn't have lost more than half my money at the DraftKings Millie Maker. But then, last week was a very strange week, very high scoring, and we had super high owned players in Zach Charbonnet, where if I had 95% but the field had 65, even when he was the highest scoring running back on the slate, it really didn't give me that much of an edge. I guess how was your week 14 and any thoughts on this kind of different slate we had last week?
Yeah, I'll give the thoughts first. I remember maybe it was 2016 or something, and my wife and I were it was a Sunday, slate had started, but we were off at Home Depot getting Christmas decorations. And I'm checking the scores, and I had somebody who was just low own. It was just going nuts in the early games. And I was like, man, we're gonna have a huge weekend. And then it ended up being one of those slates like last week where 6 or 7 guys had big games, right? And it's always weird where obviously Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Sam Darnold, that was all correlated. Josh Allen and Puka, that was correlated. But for the Josh Allen and Puka thing, the Addison and Jefferson, Darnold thing, Charbonnet, all of these to happen in different spots is just so unusual, especially in the context of this season. Some weeks are just like that, right? They're just weird like that. I've got a fun story from this last weekend as well. So my daughter my 3-year-old was really sick on Wednesday and Thursday, and I caught it on Saturday. It was vomiting sickness. So I'd already been building throughout the week. I had 2 Aiden O'Connell rosters I liked, 1 Jameis roster I liked. And what I had left to do was build my Sam Darnold double and my Josh Allen Puka roster. And those were going to be my 5 rosters. And so Saturday night, I'm throwing up, and then I would sleep for 30 minutes and then get up, lay in bed, throw up some more. And so I wake up at 10 p.m. and I was I got to get these last rosters. And I was I'm not building this Darnold roster. I'm not building this Josh Allen roster. So I just took one of my Aiden O'Connell rosters, changed 2 pieces. I was just all right, whatever. This is what I'm rolling with. So it was obviously not. I was playing Saquon on all these rosters. But the Josh Allen roster, because it would have started Saquon, Charbonnet, Garendo, Josh Allen, Puka, that really forces your hand on those final few spots. It was pretty clear what that roster would have looked like. Would have the different ways I could have built it all would have been around 220 to 230 points. So it would have been nice, but nothing huge. And so it was what it was, right? We were both on the Vikings last week. We were on Justin Jefferson. I actually had more Addison in my practice builds than Justin Jefferson, but kind of the nature of the week, I just had two Jefferson rosters out of 4, no Addison rosters, but would have been a nice week for me, not a huge week. Instead, it was a week in the dumps of just vomiting and watching Aiden O'Connell also vomit his play on the field.
Yeah. Actually, on FanDuel, I did pretty well. I had 6 single entry rosters, and 2 of them were Josh Allen, Khalil Shakir, Puka Nacua, stacks, and 2 of them were Sam Darnold, Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, and Darnell Mooney stacks. And those 4 out of my 6 single entry rosters just went berserk, and I won a bunch of tickets and no final seats, but I won fan championship tickets, NBA tickets. And actually, I kind of thought those rosters did so well. Really, my issue was bankroll allocation, right? If I had just put less into multi-entry, just because the chalk hit so much, and my single entry rosters tend to be a little bit chalkier than my mass multi-entry. Like the best rosters I had were the first rosters I made.
Yeah.
And then anything after that, every additional roster lineup that I made was getting farther and farther from that from the first place prize in the contest. So yeah, it is what it is, and we move on to week 15, championship week. In some formats, we've got the live finals on both FanDuel and DraftKings this week. We have like the fan championship, some very big contests. Even if you're not in the live final, and first week, I guess, of like season long playoffs for most leagues. And we have no bye weeks this week. It's the end of the bye weeks, but we do, I think, have 2 Monday night games. So I think 12 games on DraftKings, 13 on FanDuel. I guess any initial thoughts on the week?
Yeah. So my initial thoughts when I came out of doing all my research, it was like, I've got a pretty small pool of players that I like. And then I looked at the players and I was like, I don't really love, for the most part, I don't really love any of them. And then you look at ownership and it was like, okay, like there's nothing I'm missing. Right. And I think it's just kind of a week where the best plays, literally the best plays available are like B- plays at best, maybe C+ plays. And then you get to like, oh, nobody's on Lions and Bills. Like Josh Allen's coming in like sub 4% owned. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery coming in sub 5% owned. And there's some other spots like that. Say nobody's on Saquon or Jalen Hurts. Like one of them is probably going to put up 2 or 3 touchdowns. And so it's one of these weeks where and we talked about this last week, right? Like you go off the board at running back last week and you take on a guy who has a lower probability of getting you a good game, or even like my one non-Charbonnet roster last week, I had Darnell Mooney as like my Charbonnet pivot, right? I was like, I'm going to play Darnell Mooney and hope he outscores Charbonnet. Well, like you take on more risk in order to get this score, and then you get it, and then like, what does it matter, right? You're still getting blown away by the guy who's really like, who's an A or A+ play at high ownership. So like, it doesn't make sense to go off the board at running back last week, lower price running back. Cause like, yeah, you're taking a lower probability shot for getting a solid score, and you're still probably behind the field. Whereas this week is different, where I see like what the field is on, none of it's A or A+ plays. It's all kind of B- and below. So then you just say, okay, do I want to be on the same B- plays as the field, the same C+ plays as the field? Or do I want to use this week to say, shoot, like what could happen differently with a lot of upside? And I think that's kind of the nature of this week, which means that this conversation between you and me has a chance to be valuable, because we usually both kind of see some things that the other doesn't see. And hopefully you've got some stuff in that regard of like, yeah, here's some ways things could play out and get kind of wacky. I think that's going to be the way to win this week.
I think it's a really interesting week because, we have one game that has a total, I think 54.5. I think the next highest game is maybe like 46.5 or 47, something like that. And it's this Bills Detroit game, and the projected ownership is not very high on that game, but it's the only game I've heard people talk about when I read content or listen to shows. It's like, oh, what's going on with this Bills Detroit game with the low projected ownership? I think it'll probably have higher ownership than is projected. Like if I'm making one roster this week, I think I would have multiple pieces from this game, just because it has such a higher total than the other games. The question is, where do we go? Because like Josh Allen is now really expensive, and Jared Goff doesn't always put out this outlier score that we necessarily need or want for our rosters. But I think there's a lot of pieces that I like from this game, and so I think we have to start the week there. I do think this game will probably be higher owned than like projected ownership shows, just because people are going to say, well, I can get a really high scoring game at low ownership. And if you're not like listening or watching anything and you're just making a roster on Sunday, then you're probably looking, well, what game has the highest total, and you're going to this game. But I think there are multiple ways to like stack this game where you don't necessarily need to have Josh Allen, but like I'll definitely have some Josh Allen rosters. The Bills give up the second most receiving yards and receptions to running backs. So that's like something I'm very interested in. And Jahmyr Gibbs never seems to get a ton of ownership. I like David Montgomery as well. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is one of the guys I definitely want to be over the field on. Like he's probably going to be like my premier spend up. I think 1 week season, the write up that you guys did had a thing about the Bills giving up. They want to limit big plays, but that tends to give them, they tend to then give up the more of like the middle of the field. I guess like, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, no, I mean, I see the low ownership because Josh Allen's topped 30 points once since week 3, and he's just coming off that game, right? And it took a 42 to 44 game for Khalil Shakir to hit a 4x salary multiplier. Amari Cooper's best game with the Bills is 16.6. Keon Coleman hasn't cracked 20 points yet. Dalton Kincaid hasn't cracked 14 points yet. So I get it. You get the Lions side where they're probably going to score points, but who benefits? But also, yeah, like if this were coming in as the highest owned game on the slate, then I would be like, I kind of think we can win in a different way, guys. But then if it's coming in low owned, again, that doesn't change what happens in the small sample size of 1 week. But if we're thinking about what would make us the most money if we could play out the slate 100 times, now all of a sudden it tilts over to like, oh, this game actually becomes super plus EV because of the lower ownership. But then you also speak to something we saw it with Saquon last week. Like the ownership projections we have to work with on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are largely driven by projection systems, are largely driven by implied team totals and all that. And so you start to pick up the guys that you're constantly hearing people say, this guy's lower owned than he should be. This spot's lower owned than it should be, whatever the case might be. And so then the ownership starts to creep up there. But I do think that there's people will get interested in Josh Allen. He's still 8,500, right? People still don't know who to stack him with. People still don't like playing Jahmyr Gibbs in this split backfield. Like people still will be like, can I really go to Amon-Ra St. Brown? Like, are they going to throw it enough? Is he going to get enough targets? Or am I paying all this salary for 6-7 targets like he's been getting? So I do think that ownership doesn't creep up high enough to dissuade us from like the expected value that's added from this being lower owned than it should be.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I was looking at Amari Cooper had 14 targets last week and hit 95 yards. And he's 5,300 and he's an Amari Cooper playing with Josh Allen. Not all the pieces from this game are super expensive. I don't know. Like you can easily make a Josh Allen, Amari Cooper roster and you have money to spend. Khalil Shakir isn't that expensive. I guess maybe one of the issues with this game is we probably have more people returning than are out. So it looks like things are kind of getting spread out, right? Like Dalton Kincaid is, I think expected to return. And so, there's a question, well, do I want to play Amari Cooper if Kincaid is back and, Keon Coleman is back? I don't know. I think you have to embrace some risk with this game. Just say the total is 54.5. And I want to play some pieces of this game. I don't mind the idea of actually using pieces from this game with a different quarterback. And I guess that'll lead into, our other game environments. Like I think the game that's maybe projecting the best is actually Arizona and New England. And I think Kyler Murray is going to be popular this week. And I really don't mind the idea of taking Kyler Murray, just stacking him with only Trey McBride from this game. And you're filling like quarterback with a team from a high, implied point total. You're filling tight end where there's maybe a low opportunity cost, and then using a couple of other pieces from the Buffalo Detroit game. So you're maybe getting some Kyler Murray upside. And then if this other, the Buffalo Detroit game does have, a big, and it turns into a shootout, maybe you're capturing some of that game. I guess like if you're looking past, Buffalo, Detroit, what are the other game environments that catch your eye? And, would one of them be the Arizona New England game?
Yeah. I mean, I think the Arizona New England game is interesting. I think ideally, if you're playing Kyler, in my mind, if you're playing Kyler, in order for him to put up a tournament winner, the Patriots have to keep it close. And I think that the sharpest way to build it is you add Ramondre to that roster, or you add one of these Patriots pass catchers and tell the story of how the Patriots keep it close. Because otherwise you're playing this chalky quarterback who's kind of a B- C+ play, who's perfectly fine because most of the quarterbacks are that type of play this week. But like you're just playing the same guy everybody else is playing in the same way everybody else is playing him. So obviously playing like Lions and Bills pieces with that is a way to get different. Playing a Patriots piece with that is a way to get different. It's kind of how I see that one.
I'm going to end up playing some Kayshon Boutte.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But like go for it. Right. Everyone was on him. He didn't hit as everybody moved off. Like nothing changed with him fundamentally. But yeah, to me, a couple of places I'm drawn toward are places that the implied team totals aren't leading projection systems toward. And I think that they should be higher owned than they're going to be. And that's Tua against Houston, and Jameis against the Chiefs. And I think those are two spots that like they're not going to show up in projection systems the way that they should because of, or they're showing up, for the median projection, right, based off of the implied team totals, but they don't like account for the upside in these spots. And so those are the two quarterbacks. Like to me, I like those guys more than Kyler. I like those guys more than Herbert. Guys are going to draw higher ownership. And yet I think that Tua and Jameis are actually better plays that make us more money over time.
Yeah. So for me, the strong preference would be the Houston Miami game. I'm kind of sorting this week in my brain to like we have the high total game that's not projecting that well. We have some other games like I think like the Chargers are going to project pretty well. Like for me, the thing that's popping off in like optimal lineups like Kyler Murray stacks with and some Drake May as well. I think some of that might be like tight end forcing like making those rosters look a little bit better because like Trey McBride is making Kyler Murray kind of if you force in a stack and start running some optimal lineups, that might be a reason you get more Kyler Murray than maybe you should. But yeah, I'm really interested in this Houston Miami game just because the number of playmakers in that game is absurd. It just like kind of bothers me. I feel like the total should be higher. Like that's not a betting recommendation. I'm just surprised, right? With like Nico Collins, Tyreek Hill, Devin Achane, Tua, CJ Stroud. Like, why isn't the game total higher? But it might be the kind of thing we're looking at in retrospect and go, well, yeah, like maybe the median total is the total that the game has, but it clearly just has players they can just run down the field and nobody can catch them, and that then turns the ball back over to the other team. Yeah, I don't know. I think if I'm building like say 6 single entry rosters again, one of them is going to be a stack from that game. Cleveland, Kansas City, I'm not as high on. I'm not a believer really in Jameis. I'm definitely interested in the Kansas City defense, but I will say I don't think it's impossible, and I'll certainly have some stacks from this game in my multi-entry build. And I'm a little bit interested in Xavier Worthy more than I usually am. Just Cleveland gives up the most yards per reception, and Xavier Worthy hasn't jumped off the page I think in that category, but he's like a guy that should. So I will have some like Xavier Worthy and Jameis Winston stacks with Cleveland receivers.
Yeah, and I mean I think that Worthy works really well with that because his volume's probably not increasing. So it's if he's hitting, it's from him hitting for long plays, which means quicker scores for Kansas City, which means Jameis gets the ball back quicker, responding to points or chasing points or whatever it is. I think Jameis does really well in this spot, and I really like him this week. But certainly can respect not liking Jameis because it's Jameis. There's volatility there. Yeah. Anything else that you're seeing at quarter? I mean, I think it's just a thin slate at quarterback, which is why like the idea of going up to Josh Allen or Hurts or Jaden Daniels or one of these guys that people just won't be on, I think is also an attractive way to attack this slate.
I might be a little bit higher on Justin Herbert, I think, than it sounds like you are. Like the Tampa Bay gives up the third most passing yards per game. So it's something I'm interested in. We got to see the status of Vlad McConkey. McConkey's always somebody that shows up in optimal lineups. I'm not like super high on him. I think I forgot to remove him from my rosters last week because he was in the Sunday night game on FanDuel. It's like got a bunch of Vlad McConkey zeros. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'll play some Justin Herbert. He's going to project well, and I'm not going to force him out of my rosters. I think the quarterbacks I had written down were Kyler Murray, Goff, Josh Allen, Tua, and Justin Herbert. Though I guess Joe Burrow is actually popping up in some optimal lineups. And I'm probably going to be under the field if he's going to be high owned, just because I actually do like Chase Brown. I was looking at Chase Brown this week and thinking this whole season, I don't know what the difference has been between Chase Brown and Alvin Kamara since Zach Moss went down. Chase Brown should have been more expensive this whole time. They're playing Tennessee, which is a weird defense. It's a defense I like to write up for I like to write up players against the Tennessee defense. Because I think they give up the 4th most points per game in the NFL, and I think the 2nd fewest yards per game. So if I don't like a guy playing Tennessee, I can say, well, they don't give up any yards. But if I do like a player against Tennessee, I can say, well, they give up the 4th most points in the NFL. But the guy I like from this game, I think, is Chase Brown more than Joe Burrow, just because I can see Cincinnati getting a lead and then running the ball, and they give so much of the backfield to Chase Brown. So I'm probably more interested in Chase Brown than Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure.
Yeah. I guess so. Looking at some other things, this week, a question I have, I'm getting some Malik Neighbors, and I don't know how I feel about it. The last thing I did before we hopped on the show, I was looking to see what is the most amount of yards that Tommy DeVito has passed for in the NFL, and I think the answer is 246, but it was against a terrible Washington pass defense last season. Any thoughts on Neighbors? And I guess that game is, we should maybe talk about Derrick Henry on the other side of that. Just, Baltimore has given up so many passing yards this game. Like, we have a player in Malik Neighbors that's going to be, probably the focus of the passing game for his team's offense. Is it justifiable to play Malik Neighbors?
Yeah, it's justifiable. I'm not going to play him. It's interesting, right? This week, like 3 of the 9 highest projected owned wide receivers are Brian Thomas Jr. relying on Mac Jones, and Calvin Ridley relying on Will Levis, and Malik Neighbors relying on Tommy DeVito. It's, again, the nature of the week. It's like kind of fragile chalk plays this week. No, I mean, I think sometimes offenses just aren't good, and why did the Titans not do anything against the bad Jags defense last week? It's because the Jags suddenly found the recipe to play really good defense, or is it because the Titans aren't a good offense, right? And so I like the same thing with the Giants. I don't always mind, I don't always avoid like bad offenses, but especially when people are going toward them, I just, generally speaking, it's like, I'm not that scared of getting killed, like buried for not having played these guys. And I do think that the field could get buried for playing them. It's kind of how I see those guys. But yeah, I mean, like, am I going to argue against playing talent in a decent matchup? No. But yeah, that's how I see those guys myself.
I have some interest actually in the Jacksonville tight end. I think Brenton Strange.
Brenton Strange,
yeah. Mac Jones has a tendency, I should look this data up, but I feel like he has a tendency just to throw to the tight end. And so, that might be, if Brian Thomas is going to be popular, then maybe there's some leverage there. And it could be a week where just no tight end does anything. And so if you're getting, if you're getting 6 receptions and 40 yards from like Brenton Strange at $2,500, if no tight end does anything, and you're getting like maybe a little bit of leverage or something, especially if there are big game stacks, or expensive game stacks that we want to play, maybe one way we do it is by saving some money at tight end. Having said that, I mean, there's some pretty good tight end plays. They're also very cheap. Like, I think I was looking at Sam Laporte is only like 4,400. So I guess they have still a $1,900 difference. So yeah, I don't know. I have some interest in the Jacksonville tight ends of all things. But I guess running back, like Derrick Henry, how high are you on Derrick Henry? Do you think he's worth the spend up this week? Yeah,
well, I mean, like, if I'm playing Tua doubles and Jameis triples, like, I have salary to spend. You know what I mean? And so, do I think that Henry goes for 32 plus points? I think he's probably an underdog to get that type of score. But like, this is the type of week where he can do it. And so, yeah, Derrick Henry really stands out to me. Up there at 8,300 in terms of like, Jamar Chase is going to be popular. Who else up here? I guess that's really it, right? Like, it's not that exciting up at the top this week. Saquon's in a bad matchup. So yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry's the one who really stands out. And then I think Saquon, in terms of like what can win you a tournament, he's still in that bucket, right? So, and then there's also like, I'm looking right here at like a practice build I have of Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, which is totally possible to do this week and would just be really unique, right? Where people are going to pay for Dowdle and Chuba, who, again, these are the guys who have inspired my thoughts on this week of like, maybe we just go off the board a little bit, because I go through my research and it's like, oh yeah, like Chuba and Dowdle are 2 of my favorite running backs. And then you finish all your research and you're like, oh, they really are 2 of my favorites. And then you're like, oh, they're going to be 2 of the 2 highest owned running backs. And you're like, couldn't we do something different this week? And so I think that there's just edge in thinking outside the box, because yeah, Chuba and Dowdle are 2 of the sharper plays on the slate. But is that really where you want to, win or lose the slate? Maybe we go different direction and go Derrick Henry. Maybe we go Saquon Barkley, pay up at running back instead of paying down. So yeah, I definitely like Derrick Henry though this week.
Yeah, I guess we should talk about the Dallas Carolina game. I was looking at that game, I've seen two bad rush defenses, and Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard both definitely in play. Rico has been getting more of the work in Dallas, and Chuba Hubbard had Jonathan Brooks unfortunately get injured, so that kind of secures the backfield for him. I was actually surprised. I was thinking I like Dowdle because I would want to go with the favored running back in this case, and the favored running back is not Rico Dowdle. Carolina's the favorite in this game. Wow, things have really turned around from a few weeks ago. So yeah, I agree. Chuba's a really good play this week. He's going to be one of my higher owned running backs, I think. And I'll definitely be playing some Dowdle as well. But I agree. Maybe we'll end up under the field on Hubbard and Dowdle, just because there are a lot of really good running back plays. Because the Detroit guys are definitely, somebody I want to get to. I just talked up Chase Brown. If I have the money to spend, I probably want to spend up for Derrick Henry. We talked about Joe Mixon and the Miami Houston game. So I probably will end up spreading out my exposure at running back somewhat, but I agree. Chuba and Rico Dowdle are two pretty good plays. I guess, would you play them in the same lineup? Is maybe a question, just because if one's hitting and maybe chewing up a bunch of yardage and clock, maybe that doesn't give the other one as many opportunities to succeed. Any thoughts on playing them in the same lineup?
Yeah, I don't mind playing them in the same lineup. Both teams are going to try to win a run balanced approach here. And I think this game will stay relatively close. You talked about the Panthers being favored, right? I mean, Chiefs took a last-second field goal to beat them. Panthers should have beat the Bucks. Chuba fumbled in overtime when they were in field goal range. They should have beat the Eagles. Leggett didn't come down with that pass in the end zone. And so, this has been a genuinely good team lately. But how are they going to try to control this one? Probably on the ground. And then, but they probably don't jump out to a huge lead. So the Cowboys are able to play their style of offense. So, yeah, I think that we can see limited overall volume in this game and still see each of these guys touching the ball 22 plus times.
Yeah, I probably won't put a rule to exclude using them, but I probably will, maybe if I'm hand building, be more inclined to try to take some salary and spend up for a different, one of the Detroit running backs or Derrick Henry. I guess a couple other games which we didn't touch on as much. Indiana, Denver, or the Colts and Denver. I could be talked into some Bo Nix. I'm probably not going to go there single entry. But Indianapolis hasn't had the best defense this year. Thoughts on the Colts and Broncos? I guess battle of the horses.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I prefer Sutton just solo over Nix, but I don't mind Nix, especially given the context of quarterbacks on this slate. I'm curious about the Anthony Richardson projected ownership. He's kind of top 6, top 7, but I wonder how much we'll really see that hold against this Denver defense. But definitely more interested in the Denver side. And then we know that Denver fractures this backfield. We know that they fracture all the pass catching work behind Sutton. So it's you're either playing Nix and Sutton, or you're playing Sutton or nothing, right? From this team. And so, I see Sutton as viable, and I wouldn't argue against Nix.
Actually, I agree. I'd be much more interested in the Denver side of this one. I don't know if I'll play much from Indianapolis at all. And actually look at Denver a little bit like I use the last game to touch on is Washington and New Orleans. I think that Denver and Washington both are probably going to put up some points. It could be between a split backfield, and I just don't necessarily want to go there in a large. I could be talking to some Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton, but I probably prefer just using Cortland Sutton. Washington, I could be talking to some Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. But I probably won't. It's maybe not a single entry thing, and not something I'm going to go to in huge volume. Just I wouldn't be shocked if it hit. I see Washington probably just running this with Brian Robinson, but also Jeremy McNichols and Christian Rodriguez, and can just see that nobody really from Washington all year has elevated off the page in terms of a standout score.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Brian Robinson, one game all year, over 18 touches. I don't think that Eckler being out changes the fact that they want to limit his touches, keep him healthy, and they have other capable backs. So, I do think Jaden Daniels is on this week where it's we're kind of throwing darts at quarterback, and it's Jaden Daniels probably puts up 25 one way or another, right? I don't know that I'll actually end up getting there at his price tag, but I do think he's one of these interesting like higher cost quarterbacks that's going to grab lower ownership and could be a difference maker on the slate. Terry McLaurin currently coming in at like sub 1 or sub 2% projected ownership as well, right? So if that ends up hitting, all of a sudden you're elevating way above the field. Although they probably just are able to play this game through the ground game, you don't actually get anything beneficial there.
I do think like Noah Brown is out.
Right.
I think maybe out for the season. And so yeah, I mean there's something you said that maybe that does open up some opportunities for Washington. They just seem to spread the opportunities around so much. And they have, they still have Diami Brown. They still have Luke McCaffrey. Like, so they're Zacharias. So yeah, there could be other other guys that just step in. But I guess maybe that's last thing we should touch on, like value plays. It's a week because I brought up Diami Brown. Are you seeing any like value plays at the wide receiver position or any positions that stand out, like really low cost value plays?
Yeah, nothing that feels projectable, which I like. At this point in the season, I like because people want to find the projectable plays, and I'm so comfortable at this point taking the Troy Franklins or the Marvin Mims and being like, this guy can score 20 points and nobody's going to be on them, right? Because a lot of times that's what wins tournaments at this point in the year. But I do think the Patriots wideouts. I think that Michael Woods, who's played 63 out of 70 snaps from the Browns last week, and now known to Njoku. I think Jordan Akins at tight ends, Stone Smart, Brenton Strange, like there's places to save salary that are somewhat sharp. And then there's just kind of the dart throws with upside, and none of it really separates like sub 4K wide receiver, tight end, sub 4,500 even is how I'm seeing it.
Yeah. I do think like Jalen McMillan is interesting.
Yes, yeah.
And I'll probably end up playing a lot of Calvin Austin again and seeing how it goes. Sometimes it turns out, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, that just about wraps it up. Any final thoughts on the week?
No, none for me. Good show. Strange week for sure.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting week. I think there's a big difference between like what's projecting well and the higher total games of the week. So yeah, we'll see how ownership turns out on Sunday. That'll do it for week 15 of Solo Ship, and we'll see you guys next week.